more as well. So that's a way that also we can start to reduce this obsessive compulsive thinking mind. Okay. And then just one more point here from Attention Revolution to finish this presentation. And this is something I think I touched on a little bit earlier, but it's also very important here. He says, in our material society, even for people who are drawn to non-materialistic values, there is a strong tendency to take our current way of life as the norm and then add meditation to fix it, like a band-aid applied to a festering wound. As I think mentioned earlier, that's a little bit, unfortunately, what some of the modern mindfulness movements do, is they just present this magic pill of mindfulness that somehow will soothe all the problems in your life. But if you've got a dysfunctional lifestyle, that could just make it worse. So we need a framework around that mindfulness, and that's what we're starting to talk about here. He says, my first experience with meditation in the late 1960s is a good example. I went to a teacher who gave me a mantra and told me how to meditate on it. But in these instructions, there was no reference to the way I should lead the rest of my life. Even now, decades later, meditation is often taught with little or no reference to any of the above prerequisites. It has been reduced to a kind of first aid to alleviate the symptoms of a dysfunctional life, with all its anxieties, depression, frustration, and emotional vacillations. For a mind that is assaulted with a myriad of mental afflictions such as craving, hostility, and delusion, we need more than a medic. We need long-term intensive care. That's what this training is all about. Any questions about any of these?
Just the term eliminate compulsive thinking. So eliminate in Hebrew is להכחיד, לא?
Abandon.
Okay.
Eliminate means get rid of, abandon.
Yeah.
Let go
So,
of.
yeah. So I'm going around this again, but maybe you have some tips, because something about the eliminate seems a bit aggressive when we have, you know what I mean? Being aggressive towards compulsive thinking can make
But eliminate
more.
here, it doesn't mean have aversion.
Yeah.
Eliminate just means get rid of, let go of.
How?
By not getting caught up. So one thing,
Yeah.
as I mentioned now, as long as we have the worldview, the source of my happiness and sufferings out there, I think this is going to be impossible. Because you're always going to be thinking about how can I get these things that seem to make me happy? How can I avoid these things there that seem to be causing me suffering? I mean, it's just going to be constant. So one thing that's going to help is shift the worldview. Shifting worldview won't get rid of it, of course, but it will really greatly reduce it, I think, because a lot of obsessive compulsive thinking is about how to control and manipulate things there. So that's one. But then, of course, and this is something I'm going to talk in more detail tomorrow evening when we talk short-term strategy in general, is we need mindfulness. Because if we don't cultivate mindfulness, we just get caught up. We get caught up in this, we get caught up in our mental afflictions, we just get caught up and overwhelmed. So if we want to deal with mental afflictions, if we want to start to reduce compulsive thinking, we need to notice it when it first arises. If we don't notice it, before we know it, we're completely caught up in it. Then it's more difficult. But if we have some mindfulness, and we notice these things coming up, then we can just watch it. Because if you can watch it, you're free of it. It can't go anywhere. So this, like any mental affliction, being able to monitor, to look at our mind, is already very effective in reducing this and all mental afflictions. And then, of course, as well as that, we can apply antidotes to everything. From the compassion side of practice and from the wisdom side of practice. In particular, the wisdom side of practice, which we're going to look at tomorrow, is when we get caught up in this obsessive compulsive thinking about something, or anger about something, or attachment about something, then we can investigate, where is the me that is getting caught up in this? Where is the object that I'm obsessing about or getting angry about? And where is the compulsive thought? So we can investigate any one of those, and we'll see we'll not be able to find it, and that will dissolve, and that will immediately drop this away. And then, of course, at a much deeper level, and this is what nature of mind is a lot about, is that, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, the idea that we can talk about transforming the mind from one perspective, but the other one is the discovery method of connecting with the Buddha nature, the inner purity. And if you can connect with that through nature of mind practice, there's nothing to transform. Then the compulsive thinking is not compulsive thinking anymore. So these are some things we can do. But I think, again, the two key elements to begin is shifting worldview and mindfulness. If we do those, work on those, I think we can start to really reduce this a lot.
To be more present in the senses.
Yeah, well, to be more present and just, with whatever we're doing. Because often obsessive compulsive thinking is commentary about what we're doing. No?
Or something else completely.
Exactly. And if we notice that coming up, we can just watch it and then it'll pass. We won't get caught up in it. So I think that's going to help.
Sometimes it feels that if we won't think, about things, then we wouldn't get ahead, and we won't have a drive to do things, and then.
That's right. So we're not saying stop thinking. I mean, sometimes we need to think. I mean, otherwise we're just like a vegetative state. But the thing is, we're the slave now. The mind is the master. We have a lot of blah, blah, blah when we don't need it or don't want it. We want to be the boss. We want to switch on the thinking mind when we need it. And when we don't need it, be quiet, please. And that's where this shamatha practice is very helpful, particularly the one observing thoughts and emotions. We will become the masters of our mind, and we will be able to then just switch it on when we need it and switch it off when we don't need it. Now we're the slave of our mind.
The connecting with Buddha nature, are there specific practices with that? Is that the compassion wing, or is that different?
Sorry?
Is that what you mean by the compassion wing, or is it a different...
The Buddha nature, I mean, the perspective of the purity within is something that's really emphasized a lot in Tibetan traditions, in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen systems of practice. That's the perspective they take there.
About desires, do you mean only material desires? Or
Yeah, I mean, here actually,
friends,
in terms of spiritual practice, we should have a lot of desire, not attachment, of course. I mean, here the word desire would mean aspiration. So for spiritual practice, we should never be content and have a lot of aspiration to get to improve. So that's inner quality.
Yeah, but what about desires to be with friends, to see...
Again, it comes from motivation. Is our motivation to be with friends is because they're going to make us happy? Or is our motivation to be with friends because we can benefit them, we can do something for them? There's a big difference there. If we're hoping that being with friends is going to make us happy, we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
So can I also
say the same about money, for example? That the intention of how I want, like, what is the intention behind me wanting to have money?
Correct.
This is the one that is important.
Correct. Nothing wrong with money. What is wrong is if we have an unhealthy attitude towards that. Because if we've got money, we can help a lot of people in a material way at least, no? So again, it's just our perspective of that. If our perspective is money is going to make me happy, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
We're in trouble.
So can you set an exact example? What would be the right and good way to inspire to have money? Like what is the good to do?
Good way for what?
Like because I do want to have money. Like money.
I mean, everyone's different, so for everyone it'll look a bit different. There's not like one set, this is it. But it really just involves having a healthy perspective. If we have a healthy perspective, the rest will take care of itself, and it will probably manifest in different ways depending on the type of person we are and what we want to do with our life and how we want to benefit the world. For some people, that may involve generating a lot of money so they can help in a material way. For others, it may be just enough money so that they can do other things to help in a spiritual way. So it'll be very different from one person to the next.
I have a question about how you take home the observing the mind and awareness practices, because here I feel we're in a very certain environment. We've been practicing for a few days, and for me it's going pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I'm going back home to my high-paced life, it's almost impossible. I'm sitting and I'm getting caught in everything.
Sure. And brief answer, and then I'm going to talk more about that on the last morning. One is to not have expectation that it'll be the same there as it was here, because like you said, the environment here is much more conducive and easy. We're not having all of the normal responsibilities and all the stimulus and everything, the smartphones and the TVs and everyone else around. So first is not to have that expectation, because that's completely unrealistic. And then, of course, I think that we need to have a look at these sorts of things, because if we have a very busy, hectic life and we don't do something about that, then you're right, I think it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. So that's why it's important here to do this sort of stuff based on particularly shifting the worldview. And if we can make that shift in the worldview, and this, what I said, reflecting on precious human life and death, then I think we can really start to set up our life in such a way to provide more conducive conditions to be able to continue to cultivate these practices and so forth. But more I'll talk about on the last one. That's the short answer.
I have a question. In my meditate, it was merging the frequency. Like the mind has...
Sorry, what was that? Merging what?
Frequency.
Merging.
The mind has frequencies.
Frequency.
Like I know there is a frequency.
In the brain.
The brain or the mind?
Well, there's brain frequency.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's brain frequencies, brain wave frequencies, but that's physical.
And how it's connected to the mind?
It's
like the radio station that you said. Like in my meditation, I felt like interruption and laziness, and suddenly I was on the channel.
Right.
And then, so I thought maybe it's I merged in a frequency that was zero, something like that.
You could sort of use that sort of analogy, but there would not be a direct correlation there with the different brainwave frequencies, I don't think.
The brain frequency, there's nothing
Well, of course there is. I mean, there's
influence on the mind. I mean,
there's a correlation between brain activity and mind. I mean, what you do in the brain affects the mind and vice versa. But I don't know if you can take brainwave frequencies directly into these sorts of discussions, and there's a direct correlation there.
like the frequency of beta. If you know what is that, like all the thoughts.
Sure. I mean, there may be some parallels that
Yes.
when you're more in a delta state, you're in the sort of the very, you know.
There's technology that you can get that
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
it can tell you whether you're more in a meditative state or whether you're entering into
Right, but
There is
like.
coloration.
Right, but you know, this brainwave entrainment technology. But actually, on that point, a couple of years ago, I met Richie Davidson, who's one of the top neuroscientists in the world. I said, "What do you think about this sort of technology?" And he was not very complimentary. He said, "We're in the dark ages with this. I mean, we're really like embryonic understanding about the brain." And so all these high claims that some of these systems have of how it can transform your life and that, he says that's a little bit sort of pseudoscience. And one I saw in particular that I really astonished me is that some years ago they did studies on meditators, particularly meditators who were doing a lot of compassion meditation. And what they found was that they exhibited much higher levels of gamma frequency than a normal person. So one of these people doing brainwave had this smart idea. He said, "I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get some technology to get people to go into gamma, and they'll be more compassionate." And that's what his claim was. He claimed that doing this, you'll be more compassionate. I mean, this is just pseudoscience. It's pseudoscience.
What can you do to put people in a gamma frequency?
Sorry? Oh, no, you have this brainwave entrainment. There's different binaural beats, technology. You give some beats in the ears, and that can have an effect on brainwaves and push you into certain brainwave states. But because what they found was that people who had a lot of compassion had much more gamma, but he was claiming that, well, all I need to do is increase gamma in people and they'll be more compassionate. And this is just pseudoscience.
There is a system called the theta healing. If you
Theta healing.
theta healing.
Yeah.
It's like
I mean,
all meditations
and I think that what Richie Davidson was saying was that we're in a very embryonic state of understanding, and I'm sure that as we understand more about these things, maybe we can do things that, with working with the brain, that can have an effect on the mind. But that correlation there is very primitive understanding. I mean, very primitive. And so to make all these grand claims that doing a little bit of tweaking in the brain will make you more compassionate, I mean, I think that's a little bit unethical. Okay, last question, then we break.
I wanted to ask, how would you suggest changing or starting to change somebody's worldview? I think that the two biggest problems that I can see is one, that we already have one. For example, we've been brought up to be individualists, so we are individualists. So to unlearn something seems to be extremely difficult.
You're right, it's difficult.
Number two is the social question. Again, I think that the worst part of compulsive thinking and everything like that comes from our social existence. And again, each one of us maintains some kind of a social standing, and that comes at a cost of a behavior that is not, usually it's not socially ethical, it's socially powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you...
Yeah, you're right, and it's difficult. It is difficult. That's why we need Sangha. That's why we need to find like-minded people and associate with them. Otherwise, this is going to happen. And there was, I read an article some years ago by someone who was doing some studies about our sort of identities and worldview. And he basically said that, you know, as we go through childhood, teenage years, we're forming our worldview, and that's informed by family, society, many factors. And basically what his research showed was whatever worldview we come up with by early 20s, we're more or less stuck with that till we're about 50. It's very hard to shift it in between because we get set in that worldview. And he said that what he found was that it's only in their 50s when traditionally kids have left home, career thing finished, that they start to reflect on the meaning of life. And it's usually only in those years that people shift. So yes, you're right, very difficult. That's why we need help. Otherwise we will get stuck. That's why Sangha and reflecting on these sorts of ideas is important. Otherwise we'll just keep going in the same way. That's the reality. Okay, let's break there. Again, 3:45 the yoga, and 5 o'clock we'll come back. And what do we want to do at 5 o'clock? Good question. A bit more practice.
Shall I